The farm had always been quiet. It sat far from the main road, surrounded by open fields, old trees, and long fences that had been repaired more times than anyone could remember. The man who lived there liked it that way. He woke up before sunrise, fed the animals, checked the water lines, and walked the land every morning. To most people, he was just a farmer living a simple life. Someone who kept to himself and avoided trouble. The land had history. His family had worked it for decades, long before nearby towns grew bigger and louder. Every corner of the farm carried memories. Storms survived, dry seasons endured, and good harvests celebrated quietly. He knew every uneven patch of soil and every fence post that leaned a little more each year. The farm was not large, but it was enough. It provided food, peace, and purpose. Lately, though, small changes had begun to appear. One morning, while walking near the far fence line, he noticed a bright-colored stake pushed into the ground. It had not been there the day before. He stopped and stared at it for a long moment. Survey markers were not unusual near highways or city edges, but this was private land. No one had spoken to him. No letters had arrived. No notices were posted. He pulled the stake out and laid it on the ground. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. Sometimes people made mistakes. Sometimes lines were marked wrong. Still, the feeling stayed with him the rest of the day, like a stone in his pocket. Over the next week, more signs appeared. Small flags. Spray paint marks near the dirt road that cut across the back of the property. Tire tracks that did not belong to his truck or any neighbor he knew. Each time he noticed something new, he made a quiet note of it in his mind. He took photos. He checked old maps stored in a weathered folder at home. Everything matched what he already knew. The land was his. Clearly and legally. At the local supply store, he heard bits of talk. Someone mentioned a development project planned somewhere nearby. Another spoke about new housing and widened roads. The details were unclear, passed along like rumors rather than facts. When asked directly, no one seemed to know much. He listened, nodded, and said little. He had learned long ago that reacting too fast only caused problems. Still, the unease grew. One afternoon, a white pickup truck slowed near the entrance to his farm. Two men inside glanced toward the fields, then at a clipboard. They did not stop or speak. They drove away after a minute, leaving behind dust and silence. That night, the man sat at his kitchen table longer than usual, staring at paperwork spread in front of him. Deeds, old approvals, boundary records. Everything was in order. The farm remained calm, but the air felt different. A few days later, the sound came. It was faint at first, a low rumble carried by the wind. He paused while repairing a gate, listening. The sound faded, then returned, stronger this time. Engines. Heavy ones. He wiped his hands and walked toward the rise near the edge of the property where the land sloped gently down toward an access road. What he saw made his chest tighten in the distance. Several large vehicles were parked along the road. Bulldozers, trucks, equipment meant for serious work. Workers stood nearby wearing bright vests and hard hats, pointing toward the fields. One of the machines slowly rolled forward, its metal tracks biting into the dirt. They were heading toward his land. He did not shout. He did not run. He stood still, watching, letting the moment settle. Many people would have panicked or rushed in angry, but he knew better. Acting without clarity often gave others control of the situation. The machine crossed the boundary fence without slowing down, flattening a section of wire that had stood there for years. Dust rose into the air. The sound was loud now. It's impossible to ignore. He walked back to the house and picked up his phone. Instead of calling emergency services or arguing right away, he made a different call. Short, calm, controlled. Then another. Each conversation was brief. He explained only what was necessary. After that, he put the phone away and walked back toward the machines. By the time he reached them, the bulldozer had already cleared a small patch of land. The operator shut off the engine when he noticed someone approaching. A supervisor stepped forward, clearly annoyed at the interruption. The farmer spoke politely. He asked a simple question: what authority they had to be there. The supervisor barely looked at him. He gestured toward the equipment and said they were working on an approved project. According to him, everything had already been signed off. There was no reason to stop. The farmer asked to see the paperwork. The supervisor sighed and said he did not have it on hand. He claimed it was handled by higher offices and told the farmer to step aside for his own safety. The words were calm, but the message was clear. They did not believe he mattered. For a moment, the farmer looked around. The broken fence, the torn soil, the workers waiting impatiently. Anyone watching might have thought he was powerless. It's just one man against machines worth millions. But he felt no fear. He knew the land better than anyone. He knew the law tied to it even better. He told the supervisor that the land was private and that no permission had been granted. He spoke without anger, without raising his voice. He explained that continuing work could lead to serious consequences. The supervisor laughed lightly, said they had deadlines to meet. He waved to the operator to restart the engine. The machine roared back to life. The farmer stepped back, not out of defeat, but out of patience. He watched carefully as the bulldozer pushed forward again, cutting deeper into the soil. He noted times, movements, and directions. Every detail mattered. He walked away slowly, leaving the crew confused but unconcerned. From the house, he made one final call. This time, he gave his full name. The response on the other end changed instantly. He ended the call, sat down on the porch, and waited. The engines continued to growl in the distance, tearing into land that had been protected for generations. Birds scattered. Dust drifted across the fields. The calm farm was no longer untouched. But the people operating those machines had no idea who truly oversaw the land they were standing on, or how close. They were to a mistake that would change everything as the sun lowered in the sky. Official vehicles appeared on the road, lights flashing softly, not in urgency, but authority. The farmer stood up slowly, his expression steady. The first part of the story was ending, and the truth was about to come out. The engines did not stop right away. Even as the official vehicles slowed near the entrance, the machines kept moving, tearing through soil that had taken years to settle and grow. Dust hung in the air, thick and heavy. The workers looked uneasy now, glancing between the road and their supervisor, unsure of what would happen next. The farmer walked closer again, but this time he did not approach the machines. He stood near the broken fence, hands resting at his sides, watching quietly. His calm felt strange against the noise and chaos around him. People often believed calm meant weakness, but that was far from the truth. The first official vehicle stopped, then another. Doors opened. 2 inspectors stepped out, followed by a third person carrying a folder. They did not rush. They moved with the confidence of people who knew they belonged there. The supervisor's face changed. The relaxed smile he had worn earlier disappeared. He straightened his vest and walked forward quickly, greeting them with forced politeness. He began explaining before they even asked a question, speaking fast. Pointing toward the machines and the cleared land, the inspectors did not interrupt him. They listened. Then one of them asked a simple question. Whose land was this? The supervisor hesitated before he could answer. The farmer spoke. He stated clearly that it was his property. He did not add emotion or explanation, just a fact. One inspector nodded and asked for documents from both sides. The supervisor gestured toward his truck and said the paperwork was with headquarters, not on site. He tried to sound confident, but his voice cracked slightly. He explained that delays would cost time and money, suggesting it would be easier to let the work continue. The inspectors were not impressed. They asked the machines to be shut down. Reluctantly, the supervisor signaled to the operators. One by one, the engines died, leaving behind a sudden, heavy silence. The quiet made the damage more visible. Torn earth, crushed grass, a fence flattened into the dirt. The farmer felt a brief ache in his chest, but he pushed it aside. This was not the time for emotion. This was the time for clarity. An inspector walked the boundary line with the farmer. Together, they followed the old fence path, stopping at markers that had been moved or ignored. The farmer explained where the boundaries had always been, pointing out natural landmarks that had guided his family for generations. He spoke slowly, making sure every word was understood. Meanwhile, another inspector reviewed maps and permits on a tablet. His brow furrowed as he scrolled. Something was wrong. The supervisor grew more defensive. He insisted that the development project had approval and that mistakes like this happened often. He suggested the farmer was exaggerating the situation. That was when the farmer revealed a little more. He explained that beyond owning the land, he also worked closely with land oversight boards. His role required him to review zoning boundaries, environmental impact reports, and access rights across the district. He did not boast. He did not threaten. He simply explained his responsibility. The tone shifted instantly. The inspectors exchanged looks. One of them asked the farmer for identification. He provided it calmly. The supervisor stepped back. What had looked like a simple land grab was now something far more serious. The inspectors contacted their office. More calls were made. Names were checked. Records were pulled. With each passing minute, the weight of the situation grew heavier. The workers stood in small groups, sporting among themselves. They were just hired hands, following instructions, but they could feel the tension. No one joked anymore. No one smiled. The farmer stayed where he was, watching the land and listening carefully. He knew moments like this often revealed character. Some people accepted responsibility. Others tried to shift blame. The supervisor chose the second path. He claimed the issue came from incorrect maps sent by a subcontractor. He suggested the farmer had failed to mark the property clearly. He spoke louder now, hoping confidence would cover uncertainty. The inspectors were not convinced. They pointed out that legal access checks had been skipped. Environmental review steps had not been completed. Most importantly, written consent from the landowner was missing. That single fact silenced the supervisor. The farmer watched as authority slowly shifted away from the machines and toward the law. The land, though damaged, was no longer under threat of further destruction. One inspector issued an immediate stop work order. Red tape was placed across the access path. The bulldozers were required to remain where they were until further notice. The supervisor protested. But his words carried no weight now. As the sun climbed higher, more vehicles arrived. Not with sirens, but with purpose. Each arrival made it clearer that this situation would not be brushed aside. Neighbors gathered at a distance, curious but cautious. They whispered about what was happening, surprised that someone had finally stood up to unchecked development. The farmer spoke briefly with a neighbor, reassuring him that things were under control. He did not share details. He never did. An inspector asked the farmer if he wished to file a formal complaint immediately. He considered it for a moment, then nodded. Accountability mattered, not revenge. Paperwork began right there on the hood of a vehicle. Photos were taken. Measurements recorded. Statements written down word for word. The supervisor paced nearby, making phone calls of his own. His voice carried frustration and fear now. Promises he had relied on were falling apart. By mid-afternoon, the site was fully shut down. The farmer walked the damaged area again, this time alone. He touched the soil, dark and freshly cut. He imagined the work it would take to restore it. It would not be easy, but it was possible. One inspector approached him quietly and apologized for what had happened. He acknowledged that the system sometimes failed, but moments like this were why oversight existed. The farmer accepted the apology with a nod. He did not enjoy being right at the cost of harm to the land. As officials prepared to leave, they assured him that this was far from over. Investigations would follow. Consequences would come. The machine sat silent as the last vehicle pulled away. The farm was quieter again, but changed. The farmer stood near the fence line as evening approached. The sky softened into warmer colors. Birds cautiously returned to nearby trees. He knew the people responsible still believed this was just a delay. They were wrong. What they had started on his land had triggered something much larger. And in the next part of the story, the full cost of underestimating a quiet farmer would finally become clear. The next morning, the farm felt different. The silence was deeper, heavier, like the land itself was holding its breath. The machines were still there, frozen in place like unwanted guests who had overstayed their welcome. Red tape blocked the dirt path. The broken fence lay where it had fallen, a quiet reminder of how quickly things had changed. The farmer woke before sunrise as usual. Habit did not disappear just because trouble had arrived. He fed the animals, checked the water, and walked the fields. Each step across the damaged soil hurt more than he expected. Not because of money or pride, but because the land had trusted him to protect it. By mid-morning, phone calls began. The first was polite. Someone from the construction company asked to clear things up. The farmer listened without interrupting. Promises were made. Words like misunderstanding and paperwork error were used again and again. When the call ended, nothing had changed. The second call came from a legal office tied to the project. The tone was firmer. They asked if the farmer would consider granting temporary access so timelines could be saved. He answered calmly that access would not be discussed until investigations were complete. The call ended quickly after that. By noon, officials returned to the farm. This time, there were more of them. Environmental reviewers, zoning officers, people who carried thick folders and spoke carefully. They walked the land, took notes, and asked questions. The farmer answered each one clearly. He did not exaggerate. The truth was strong enough on its own. They asked how long the land had been farmed. He told them. They asked about water sources, wildlife paths, and soil conditions. He showed them places where animals crossed and where water pooled after heavy rain. Details others would miss mattered deeply now. One reviewer paused near the damaged area and shook his head. He said quietly that this land should never have been touched without review. The farmer nodded. He already knew in the afternoon the supervisor returned. He arrived alone this time, without the confidence he had worn before. His shoulders were tight, his voice careful. He apologized. But it felt practiced, like something said because it had to be said. He offered compensation on the spot. Money to fix the fence. Money to smooth the soil. Money to make it all go away. The farmer listened. Then he said no. The supervisor looked confused. He explained that most people would accept the offer. It would be faster, easier. The farmer told him that speed was not the goal. Responsibility was. The supervisor sighed and warned that the company had strong connections. Delays could become problems. He did not say it as a threat, but it hung in the air like one. The farmer met his eyes and replied that connections did not change the law. That ended the conversation as the day wore on. Word spread. Neighbors stopped by, some bringing food. Others just standing quietly at the fence. They shared stories of land disputes they had lost or given up on because fighting felt impossible. Seeing someone stand firm gave them a strange mix of hope and regret. The farmer listened to them all. He reminded them that the land mattered, even when it seemed easier to step aside. That evening, sat at his kitchen table again, reviewing documents under a single light. He made notes. He organized timelines. He prepared reports not just as a landowner, but as someone who understood oversight from both sides. He knew the next step would not be loud or dramatic. It would be slow. Days passed. The machine stayed silent. Officials came and went. Letters arrived. Some were formal and respectful. Others were carefully worded attempts to push him into compromise. He did not rush one morning. He received a message that changed everything. An internal review had confirmed that multiple procedures were bypassed. Not just one mistake, but several. Access rights ignored. Environmental checks skipped. False assumptions made about ownership. This was no longer a small issue. The project was suspended. When the news reached the farm, farmer felt relief, but it was quiet. He knew suspension was only the beginning. Accountability still had to be decided. The construction company released a statement, claiming cooperation and commitment to compliance. The farmer read it without emotion. Words on paper did not restore land. Another meeting was scheduled, this time at a regional office. The farmer attended not as someone looking for attention, but as someone bringing facts. He sat across from people in clean offices who had never felt soil between their fingers. He explained what had been lost and what could not be replaced easily. Some listened. Others avoided his eyes. He presented maps, photos, timelines. He showed how quickly unchecked action could undo decades of careful stewardship. By the end of the meeting, the tone had shifted. What began as damage control became something closer to reckoning. Back at the farm, life continued. He repaired what he could. He reinforced the fence. He reseeded parts of the damaged land, knowing it would take time to heal. Each small action felt like an apology to the soil. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a young worker from the construction crew approached the gate. He looked nervous. He said he wanted to apologize for what had happened. He explained that he had just followed instructions. The farmer thanked him for saying so. He told him that responsibility started with awareness. The worker nodded and left, looking thoughtful. Weeks later, a final notice arrived. The investigation had concluded. Penalties were issued. Oversight failures were acknowledged. New protections were placed on the land, stronger than before. The project would have to be redesigned from the ground up. If it moved forward at all, the farmer folded the paper carefully and placed it in his file. The farm grew quiet again. But it was not the same quiet as before. This silence carried meaning. It carried the weight of what had almost been lost and what had been saved. Standing at the edge of the field, the farmer looked out over the land as the wind moved gently through the grass. He knew the story was not finished yet. In the next part, the consequences would reach beyond the farm, showing how one quiet stand could ripple farther than anyone expected. The pressure did not fade after the investigation ended. In many ways, it grew stronger. The farm was quiet again, but beyond the fences, conversations were happening in offices and meeting rooms. Decisions were being questioned. Emails were being reread. People who had once felt untouchable were suddenly careful with their words. The farmer felt it in small ways. Requests for meetings increased. Officials asked for clarifications they could have checked earlier. Representatives wanted to talk things through. He agreed to some, declined others. He did not rush. He had learned that patience often revealed more than force. One afternoon, a formal letter arrived asking him to attend a public review session. It would be open to local residents and media observers. The project's future would be discussed openly for the first time. He read the letter twice. Public attention was not something he wanted, but it was no longer something he could avoid. What had happened on his land had become an example. He understood that examples mattered. On the day of the session, the room was full. Farmers, homeowners, planners, and quiet observers filled the seats. The farmer sat near the back at first, listening. He watched how people spoke when they thought no one like him mattered. Representatives described the project using smooth language. They spoke about growth, opportunity, and progress. Slides showed clean lines and green spaces that did not exist yet. Then the damaged land was mentioned. The tone shifted. Photos appeared on the screen. The broken fence, the torn soil, the machines sitting where they did not belong. Murmurs moved through the room. The farmer was invited to speak. He walked to the front slowly. He did not bring notes. He did not raise his voice. He simply described what had happened, step by step, as he had lived it. He spoke about the land, not as property, but as responsibility. He explained that mistakes were not just lines on a map. They were real scars. People listened. Some nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. He ended by saying that progress meant nothing if it ignored those who protected the land long before plans were drawn. When he returned to his seat, the room felt different. The discussion that followed was no longer one-sided. Questions became sharper. Answers became slower. Outside the room, conversations continued. Back at the farm, the impact showed up again. Inspectors returned to review restoration plans. This time, they asked the farmer to lead the walk. They followed his pace. They took notes when he pointed. It was a quiet shift, but a meaningful one. The construction company submitted a revised proposal. It was smaller, more cautious. It acknowledged previous failures without naming them directly. The farmer reviewed it carefully. Some parts were acceptable, others were not. He responded with clear feedback, grounded in law and lived experience. He did not reject the idea of change. He rejected carelessness. Weeks passed. The farm began to heal. Grass returned in patches. Birds settled again. The fence stood straight once more, stronger than before. Each repair felt like a step toward balance, but the real change was happening elsewhere. A notice went out across the district announcing updated procedures for land access verification. Another followed about mandatory on-site confirmation before any work began. The language was dry, but the meaning was clear. Someone had learned from this. Neighbors noticed too. People stopped the farmer on supply runs. They thanked him quietly. Some admitted they had given up land in the past because fighting felt pointless. Others said they now felt less alone. He listened, but he did not claim credit. He reminded them that standing up worked best when done calmly and together. One evening, as the sky darkened, he received a call from a senior official. The voice on the line was respectful. The official said that what happened on the farm had triggered a wider review of how oversight roles were respected. Lines of authority had been blurred for too long. The farmer thanked him, ended the call. He sat on the porch for a long time after that, listening to the night sounds return. The land felt steadier now. Not everyone was pleased. An anonymous letter arrived a few days later, accusing him of blocking progress and harming jobs. The words were sharp but careless. He read it once, then set it aside. Fear often spoke loudest when it had no facts. Another message followed. This one more careful, asking if he would reconsider certain conditions. He replied with the same answer he always gave. Follow the rules. Respect the land and talk openly as summer moved forward. The final decision came. The project would proceed only if redesigned to avoid private farmland entirely. Additional safeguards would be enforced. Independent monitors would be assigned. It was not a victory in the way movies showed them. There were no cheers, but there was fairness. The farmer stood at the edge of his field the evening the notice arrived. The sun lowered slowly, casting long shadows. The land looked peaceful again, but stronger somehow. He knew this was not just about him anymore. The story had traveled, quietly, slowly, but far. In the final part, the true impact of one calm stand would become clear, not just on the farm, but on everyone who thought power always announced itself loudly. The final decision did not arrive with drama. It came quietly, like most things that truly mattered. A plain envelope, clear language, firm conclusions. The rules would stand. The land would be protected. What happened on the farm would not be repeated. The farmer read the letter early in the morning. Sitting at the same kitchen table where he had reviewed so many documents before, sunlight slipped through the window, touching the worn surface of the wood. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in the same folder he had carried since the beginning. Then he stood up and went outside. The air was cool and fresh. The farm felt alive again. He walked the fields slowly, as he always did. But this time without the weight he had been carrying for months. The soil had settled. New grass had taken hold. The fence stood firm, its posts straight and strong. Birds moved freely across the open space. Landing without fear, nothing looked perfect, but everything felt right. Over the following weeks, life returned to its steady rhythm. The animals adjusted. Crops grew. Small repairs turned into routine tasks instead of urgent fixes. The land no longer felt like it was waiting for another blow. People still reached out. Some were neighbors asking for advice. Others were landowners from farther away who had heard the story through quiet channels. They asked how he stayed calm, how he knew when to speak and when to wait. He told them the same thing each time. Know your land. Know your rights. And do not mistake silence for weakness. He never spoke badly about the company or the officials involved. Blame did not interest him. Change did. One afternoon, an official visited the farm alone. He walked the boundary line with the farmer, not as an inspector this time, but as someone trying to understand. He admitted that systems often relied too much on assumptions. He said the events at the farm had forced people to slow down and look closer. The farmer nodded. He had seen how fast decisions became careless when distance replaced responsibility. Before leaving, the official thanked him, not formally, not for a report, but for standing firm without turning the situation into a fight. As seasons shifted, signs of the wider impact became clearer. New notices appeared on public boards explaining land access rules in plain language. Training sessions were announced for project managers and field supervisors. There was talk of community input, becoming a required step instead of an optional one. These were not loud changes, but they mattered. The farmer noticed something else too. People treated the land differently now. Survey teams asked permission first. Workers waited for confirmation instead of assuming. Small gestures, but meaningful ones. One evening, while closing the gate, he saw a family stop by the roadside. They stayed a moment looking out over the fields. The children pointed at the animals. The parents spoke quietly. When they noticed him, they waved politely and moved on. The land was being seen again. It's not just measured. The memory of the bulldozers did not disappear. It never would. But it no longer carried anger. It carried a lesson. Sometimes, standing still was the strongest move. As the year came to an end, the farmer hosted a small gathering for neighbors. Nothing formal. Just food, conversation, and shared space. People laughed. Stories were exchanged. The farm felt like it belonged not just to one family, but to a community that understood its value. Someone asked if he ever felt afraid when the machines first arrived. He thought for a moment. Then he said yes. Fear was natural. But letting fear decide was optional. Late that night, after everyone had gone, he walked the fields once more. The sky was clear. Stars stretched wide above him. The land felt quiet in the way it had before. But deeper somehow. He realized that overseeing land was not about authority or titles. It was about care. About paying attention when others rushed. About protecting what could not speak for itself. The farm had tested him. He had listened. In the end, the bulldozers left without finishing their work. The plans were changed. The rules were strengthened. And a quiet farmer returned to his routine, not as a symbol, but as a reminder. Power did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it stood still, waited patiently, and spoke only when the truth could no longer be ignored. Time passed, but the story did not end the way stories usually do. There was no clear line where everything stopped. Instead, life kept moving. And the effects of what happened on the farm continued to unfold in quiet ways. The farmer settled back into routine. Mornings came early. Evenings arrived gently. He fixed tools, mended small breaks, and watched the land respond to care. The soil grew darker where seeds took hold. Water flowed where channels had been repaired. The land remembered what it was meant to do. One day, a letter arrived from a nearby town council. It was an invitation, not a demand. They wanted him to speak at a small workshop about land stewardship and access rights. He hesitated at first. He was not a speaker. He did not enjoy standing in front of rooms, but he understood why they asked. He agreed. The room was small. It's filled with local workers, planners, and a few landowners. No cameras, no press. Just people trying to do their jobs better. The farmer spoke the same way he always did, slowly and clearly. He did not accuse. He explained. He talked about what happened when decisions were made far from the ground they affected. People asked questions. Honest ones. Some admitted they had never walked the land they approved plans for. Others said pressure from deadlines often pushed them to skip steps. The farmer listened. Then he said something simple. Land does not move at the speed of paperwork. That sentence stayed in the room after that day. More invitations came. He accepted only a few. He never chased attention. When it became too much, he returned to the farm and let the land steady him again. Back home, something unexpected happened. A group of younger workers from different projects began stopping by, asking to walk the boundary lines with him. They wanted to understand how land spoke, how to notice signs others missed. He showed them water paths, animal trails, and soil shifts that told quiet stories. He never lectured. He let the land do the teaching. Not all reactions were positive. Some people still saw him as a problem, a delay, an obstacle. A few harsh messages arrived, warning that progress would eventually push past people like him. He read them, then set them aside. He had learned that anger burned out faster than patience. One afternoon, a vehicle he did not recognize stopped near the gate. A man stepped out, older, tired-looking. He introduced himself as someone who had lost land years ago under similar circumstances. He said he wished he had known then what the farmer knew now. They walked the fence together in silence. When the man left, he looked lighter, as if sharing the story had eased something long carried. As months passed, the district released updated reports. Several projects were revised. A few were canceled, quietly, without headlines. The systems did not change overnight, but they shifted. The farmer noticed a difference in tone when officials visited now. They asked before stepping onto fields. They waited for answers instead of pushing past them. Respect, once learned, was hard to UNLER. One evening, while repairing a gate, the farmer paused and looked across the land. The sun was low, casting soft light over the fields. For the first time since the bulldozers arrived, he felt no tension when he heard distant engines on the road. They were just passing by. The farm was no longer a target. Later that year, a final follow-up letter arrived confirming permanent protections tied to the land. Not temporary measures. Not promises. Written safeguards that would remain long after he was gone. He read it carefully, then placed it with the others. The story had changed him, but it had not hardened him. If anything, it made him more aware of how easily balance could be broken and how carefully it had to be held. On a quiet morning, he stood at the edge of the field and watched the wind move through the grass. No machines, no voices. Just the sound of life continuing. He thought about how close the land had come to being reshaped without care, how easily it could have been lost to plans, drawn far away. The lesson was simple. Those who speak loudest do not always lead. Sometimes, the ones who listen longest protect the most. The farmer turned back toward the house, ready for another ordinary day. And that was the greatest outcome of all. The farm entered a season that felt quieter than any before. Not empty, not lonely, just steady. The kind of calm that comes after something has been tested and proven strong. The farmer moved through his days without thinking about court papers or meetings anymore. His hands returned fully to the work they knew best. Early mornings were filled with soft light and familiar sounds. The land responded well to the care it had been given. Crops grew evenly. Water flowed where it should. The soil no longer showed signs of stress. It felt as if the farm itself had relaxed, but the world beyond the fence had not forgotten. One afternoon, a small group arrived with notebooks and quiet questions. They were from a training program connected to regional planning offices. They asked if they could walk the land with him. Not to inspect, but to learn, the farmer agreed. With one condition, they would walk slowly as they moved across the fields. He showed them places where the ground dipped slightly, where water collected after rain. He explained how those areas looked harmless on maps but mattered deeply in real life. He pointed out trees that marked natural boundaries long before paperwork existed. No, one interrupted. They wrote less and observed more. At the end of the walk, one person said quietly that no training session had ever felt this real. The farmer nodded and reminded them that the land always told the truth, if people took the time to listen. Weeks later, he noticed a change. Survey teams began arriving with landowners instead of ahead of them. Meetings happened before markers were placed. Conversations replaced assumptions. It did not feel like a victory. It felt like correction. One evening, as he closed the gate, an older neighbor stopped by. The neighbor had lived nearby for decades and rarely spoke about the past. That night, he shared a story of land taken long ago without proper notice. He said watching the farmer stand firm had reopened something painful, but also healing. The farmer listened without trying to fix it. Some things only needed to be heard. Later that season, a small article appeared in a local paper. It did not name him directly. It spoke about a farm where rules were finally followed and how one case had improved processes across the district. The farmer read it once and set it down. Attention still did not interest him, but impact did. At home, the farm continued its rhythm. Repairs became fewer. Growth became steadier. The land felt balanced again. One morning, a young worker arrived early, waiting by the fence. He said he had recently started a job in land management and wanted advice. He admitted he was afraid of making mistakes that could harm people like the farmer. The farmer told him something simple: never assume you know land better than the people who live on it. The worker thanked him and left with a thoughtful expression. As the year moved on, the farmer noticed something else changing inside himself. The constant alertness he had carried since the bulldozers arrived had faded. He no longer scanned the horizon for trouble. He trusted the systems again, at least enough to breathe, but he also trusted himself more. He understood now that quiet people were often underestimated, and that underestimation could be used wisely. One evening, as the sun set low, he walked to the far edge of the property where the first fence had been broken months earlier. The repaired posts stood strong. Grass covered the scars almost completely. If someone walked past now, they would never know what happened there. That felt right. The land did not need reminders of harm. It needed continuity as night settled in. The farmer returned to the house, satisfied in a way that did not need explanation. The story that began with engines and dust had turned into something quieter. But more lasting change had not come from shouting. It came from standing still. And that was enough. The change was clear now. Even to people who had never stepped foot on the farm. Things moved more slowly across the district. Papers took longer. Site visits happened more often. What once felt rushed now felt measured. The farmer noticed it in small moments. A survey crew called ahead instead of showing up unannounced. A planning officer asked to sit at the table instead of standing over maps. These were not grand gestures, but they carried meaning. One morning, as mist lifted from the fields, the farmer received an unexpected request. A regional review group wanted him to join a short-term advisory panel, not as a figurehead, but as someone who understood land from the ground up. He did not answer right away. The farm came first. It always had, but after thinking it over, he agreed to serve for a limited time. On one condition: he would not leave the land for long stretches, and he would speak plainly, not in polished language. They accepted. The meetings were simple. No long speeches. No arguments. Just clear discussion. When plans were brought forward, the farmer asked basic questions others overlooked. Where would water go after heavy rain? How would noise travel across open land? What happened to animals pushed out of familiar paths? At first, some people shifted in their seats. These were not questions they were used to answering, but slowly, the tone changed. Plans became better before they were approved. Problems were spotted early. Avoidable mistakes were avoided. The farmer did not stay long on the panel. When his term ended, he returned fully to the farm, content that he had done what he could.